Great. So I want to offer a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today on this lovely Tuesday evening. And also a huge thank you to our 4 school committee candidates for joining us as well. I'm going to go through some logistics stuff really fast, and then we will jump into questions. So as I said, this event is going to be recorded and made publicly available online for viewing afterwards in case you would like it for reference. If you have any tech issues during the event, our tech guru, Corey Allen, is on the line. So if you have any issues, you can send him a direct message and he can help you with those. A note on using the chat. We have it set so that it's limited to the host and the co-hosts, and you can feel free to ask tech questions that way. We'll also have a short period for questions from the audience at the end of today's session. And so we ask that you please submit your questions for the candidates to Georgia Bowder-Newton, who is pinned up here at the top. And you can submit those at any time throughout the event, and she'll read 1 or 2 of those at the end, depending on how much time we have. So this event, as most of you probably know, is being hosted by 3 anti-racism groups fighting for Black lives in our neighborhood, the Melrose Racial Justice Community Coalition, and White People Challenging Racism, and their Melrose Alumni group. The first 2 groups were founded in response to the murder of George Floyd in May 2020 and the Black Lives Matter uprising worldwide. Fighting for Black Lives in Our Neighborhood is a grassroots initiative in Melrose that works to hold our public officials, police, and community accountable on racial justice. The Melrose Racial Justice Community Coalition is committed to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the city of Melrose, with a specific focus on racial and ethnic representation at all levels of city government and in our schools. And finally, White People Challenging Racism is an anti-racism workshop focusing on the role of white people in challenging and dismantling racism. The Melrose WPCR alumni group consists of people who have taken the workshop who want to stay connected to support one another, hold one another accountable, and advance individual and group action plans. And if you have any questions on any of those groups and would like more information on joining, feel free to send me a direct message during the event and I can connect you. Brief words just from my own perspective on why we're hosting this event, but I'm sure everyone here kind of has their own why on why this event is important. So from my perspective as a student of color who went to school in Melrose, I grew up thinking schools were like a really apolitical space, somewhere where you kind of left what was going on outside the door. And as I got older, I realized that schools and the people that reside within them are subject to the same implicit and sometimes explicit biases and the same forces of oppression as those that operate outside of their doors. And so I think this space is really important as a space where we can intentionally consider how the policies and practices in Melrose schools influence the lives of students and the ways that they interact with the world. I know everyone here knows students in Melrose and cares deeply for them, and that kind of unites us in this, this mutual effort. A brief word on how we chose and crafted our questions for today's event. We used a crowdsourcing method for sourcing our questions with our sign-up sheet. And after we collected the questions, we noted which ones were repeated and synthesized common concerns together. It definitely was not a perfect process, and we apologize if any of the questions you submitted are not asked tonight. And we encourage you to reach out to the candidates if you have any questions that go unanswered and you would like any more information. But we want to offer a sincere thank you to everyone who submitted questions and everyone who's here tonight for investing in the process with us and being engaged. All right, so lastly, I just want to provide brief introductions for each of our candidates in alphabetical order. As you can see, they're all spotlighted on our screen tonight. We are welcoming John Connelly, who's a candidate for school committee, Jen McAndrews, who's a current school committee member and candidate for school committee, Jennifer Razi-Thomas, also a current school committee member and candidate for school committee, and Dorie Withey, a candidate for school committee. I am going to provide 1 minute for each of you to do opening statements. We can go in the same order that I just provided, and then I will pass it over to Jane to take us through the questions for tonight's event. So John, starting with you for opening statements. Oh, John, you might be muted. There you go.
Thank you. John Connelly, I live at 10 Lincoln Street in Melrose, and it's happy to be here tonight. We're here about 50 years, and I'm a veteran, Navy, and I'm retired, finally retired from civil service. And when you're in civil service, you can't run for public office. So this is kind of an opportunity to run and try to contribute and give back to the community. That's about it.
Fabulous. Jen McAndrew.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen McAndrew. I'm the current chair of the Melrose School Committee. I'm really happy to be with all of you tonight. I want to thank the organizers for bringing us together in this virtual space. And I wanted to just use my time, my 1 minute, to talk about how I come to this work of social justice and racial justice. I entered this space together tonight as someone who is a person of great privilege, and I know that. I'm a white woman. I attended excellent public schools and elite universities. My husband and 3 children and I have economic security, housing security, and thankfully good health. And I have the privilege of having power and agency in this community. And I take none of that lightly, and I bring it all with me tonight. I also come to this work as someone who loves this community deeply and cares deeply for every child and every student in our schools. And I operate from that place. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Jennifer Razi-Thomas.
Good evening. Thank you so much for hosting Maya, Georgia, Jane, and Corey, and all the stakeholders that are listening and watching. I appreciate the work that you've been doing in Melrose. I want you to know about one of my values. I'm a clinical social worker, and I've been a social worker for over 26 years. I bring all of that passion with me into this work on the committee, and I see that it's an honor and a privilege to be working on this committee, and I hope you will re-elect me. I truly believe we can live out Melrose's tagline of one community open to all, which me and my family have experienced since we've moved here. I have my wife, Andrea, and 2 children, Kaylin and Claire. And I want to make sure that all people of color are welcomed in Melrose, especially within our schools. I will also be honoring the end of the Pledge of Allegiance, which states for liberty and justice for all. So I'm going to continue to watch out for and advocate and welcome and celebrate every student within the Melrose Public Schools, especially students that are marginalized in any way or in a minority of any way.
All right, Jen, just had to mute you for the time. Thanks.
And lastly, Dorie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much and good evening. One, thank you for holding space for us to talk about racial justice and our schools. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. I'm a mom of 2 kids here in Melrose. I have a 2-year-old and I have a 6-year-old who currently attends the Horace Mann. And I'm also a human rights commissioner. In addition to those things, I'm an educator as well. I started off as a special education teacher, and I'm now a literacy consultant, where I have the privilege of being able to work alongside districts and principals to think about their academic strategy and how we can ensure that we're supporting our most marginalized students. I've seen firsthand how a child's education can impact their abilities to succeed in life, and I strongly believe that each and every child deserves a great education.
Fabulous. With that, I will pass it over to Jane, who is going to lead us through our questions tonight.
Thank you so much, Maya, and thank you all for being here. We've randomly selected names to determine the order in which the questions would be asked. So the order in which you'll answer the questions is Jen Razi-Thomas, John Connelly, Jen McAndrew, and then Dorie Withey. And that will also be in the chat for you to reference. And so our first question for you is, how do you define equity? And what are the greatest barriers to racial equity in the Melrose school system?
So I will go first. So I see equity in education as we must develop leaders who can transform our institutions by eliminating inequitable practices and cultivate the unique gifts, talents, and interests of every child. so that success and failure are no longer predictable by student identity along lines of racial, cultural, economic, or any other social factor. I think the biggest barrier is really implicit and explicit bias, and also the fact that we have very few staff members and teachers of color. Students need to see themselves in their educators.
Oh, I'm going to go now. This is John Connelly.
Yep.
Okay. Well, equity in the dictionary is being fair or impartial. And when I saw the it's been a long time since I've been in high school, but great barriers to racial equity. I don't know if it's that bad. It sounds so bad. I know there's probably individual situations arise where there's some racial inequities, and it's up to the teachers, the parents, the administration, and the Melrose school system to kind of iron it out. And they have to recognize the situation, address it, and move forward. Something like this, we all, I don't think any of us are racially prejudiced and want this thing to get out of control. So if there is any trouble like that, they should nip it in the bud and move on so we can get educated, the kids can get educated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. To me, equity is not the same thing as equality. And I think that in an educational space in particular, and thinking about the schools and what that looks like in our schools, I'm thinking about sort of a specific example, which is the delivery of curriculum. Delivering curriculum in the same way to every student in, say, grade 4 in Melrose is not equity. Delivering curriculum material to each student in the best way for that student to access and retain and build on that curriculum to build knowledge is equity. And what does that mean? It means that some students don't just need more, or need more resources, which is often a way that we, I think, sort of imply that certain students are a drain on our system, but they have a right to those resources and they have a right to access curriculum and to access their education in a way that is equitable for them. This is not easy work. I would say that it requires, in terms of barriers, I do actually believe that there is bias in the public education system and systemic inequality. There is in every single big bureaucracy in this country, including the public schools. And although I think Melrose has done quite admirable work in the last 4 or 5 years in particular, we definitely have not completed that work, and we still have barriers. Another barrier is investment, and we have to make sure that we're continuing to invest in our educators, in professional development, and in making sure that every single student in Melrose gets not just what they need, but what they have a right to receive. Thank you.
Thank you. Equity is achieved when each and every student receives what they need to develop to the fullest of their academic and social potential. And in order for us to work towards equity, there are 3 things that I think need to be top of mind. 1, we have to ensure that we're holding high expectations for every single student, particularly when we're instructing. 2, we have to be willing to examine our biases. If it's left unchecked, it will have lasting consequences on students. And so we need to make sure that we're creating inclusive, multicultural school environments. And then 3, we need to cultivate and we need to affirm the unique interests and talents and perspectives that every student, particularly students of color and our most marginalized, bring into our buildings. If we're able to do these things, I think we become closer to that equity definition that I named earlier.
Thank you all. So the order of the next question will be John Connelly, Jen McAndrew, Dorie Withey, and then Jen Razi-Thomas. And again, it will be in the chat for your reference. And this question is on disparities in school discipline. In the 8 years for which we have state data on disparities in school discipline, Melrose has consistently ranked poorly relative to 12 of our neighboring communities. In the 2019-2020 school year, Melrose has had greater racial disparities in school discipline than Medford, Winchester, Malden, Wakefield, Stoneham, Lynn, Woburn, Revere, and Saugus. Research shows that exclusionary school discipline leads to many negative outcomes, and most seriously, the school to prison pipeline. So our question for you is, what have you done or what will you do to address the racial disparities in school discipline in the Melrose Public Schools?
Well, once again, I'm kind of surprised. I'd have to look closer at the state data, but that's kind of an eye opener. And discipline, I think it has to be even-handed. That's the main thing. And of course, some kids might act up more than others, and the teacher might overdo it, but those things have to be under control. When I was in school, I remember they had in the South End there, they had the after school, they stayed in Jug. It was Jesuits. And you went to Jug, so right away you went after school, you had to just stay there. Everybody get the same treatment. They had to do some extra homework, whatever it was. And you were late getting home for supper. So it stayed with the boys, and they didn't act up too much after that. So if it's even-handed and if the students see it's not even-handed, then they're gonna have situations develop. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start with a clear statement that is not acceptable for Melrose. Even if we consider, as is sometimes the case year to year, that the numbers in some of these data sets can be small, or comparing groups of students within those data sets can be very small. That's not excuse making, it's just a little bit of context. But even so, it is not okay, the data that Jane read out. As a school committee member, and I think of this in terms of what can the school committee do, because that's the office that we're running for. I think there's two things in my view. One is policy and the other is data. And maybe I'll actually take them in the opposite order. We need to gather and highlight this data more readily, more often as a committee, and be ready to talk about it. The second thing I think we need to, our role is in policy. That's one of the three main areas that the school committee has a role. And I think of that in two ways. One is what is disciplinary and what isn't. And the second is how we implement those policies operationally as a school committee is through the handbook, the student handbook. And I actually wanted to call out something that we added this year that I would love for everyone to take a look at as one really concrete example. In fact, I put the page numbers down here. It's page 20 and page 22 in the secondary code of conduct and school handbook, which is a Melrose Public School behavioral flow chart. What I think it does is it characterizes both the de-escalation responses. It's clear about who is responsible for managing behaviors in the classroom. It includes redirection, it includes reteaching, it includes other ways beyond and before discipline to make clear when who is going to respond and how they're going to do so. And I think that communication is critical. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think it's critically important for educators and staff, as I mentioned earlier, to examine their biases, particularly as it relates to race. Biases can be subconscious. You can carry around a bias that you don't even know exists for an incredibly long time without recognizing it. And so if we provide educators and staff with opportunities to reflect, to build more self-awareness, that has the potential to positively impact students. And honestly, I've seen that firsthand as an educator myself, being able to sit in trainings where I've had an opportunity to examine my own bias, to think critically and become more self-aware. I also think as a school committee member, in addition to unpacking our biases, it would be helpful to propose a disciplinary review board. And that board could be comprised of community members, parents, educators, students, right? And their responsibility on this particular board would be to look at the disciplinary data and the actions that have been taken place and the trends, and ultimately hold up a mirror and begin to help us think through, are we disproportionately creating disciplinary actions against students of color? And if we are, we should be having those tough questions. We should having conversations, and we should begin to really think through what are the changes that we need to make so that that does not continue.
Thank you. It's a really, really excellent question to bring up based on that data. I think it's really imperative for us to reflect that back to our staff, to our school leaders, because it does hint at bias within our staff. And so I know from working within the school district on their within their leadership group that's working on anti-bias work and DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, that the whole district is really working hard to be much more aware of their bias. And I think that there's still a fear of, if we teach everything that we really want to teach, the community might be angry with us. So the teachers really need our school committee support to do this work. And they've basically said, like, I need to know that you have my back when I'm going to teach the subjects, the truth about the indigenous people and how they were treated, the truth about slavery. The teachers need to know that we have their back, and we do have their back. The other thing is that teachers and support staff need to be trained in how to recognize behavior, that all behavior is communication, and that what is that student trying to communicate to us? And instead of seeing it as something that needs to be disciplined, something that needs to be taught, how to behave differently than how that student might have acted. So working on bias, working on understanding youth culture, not overreacting to infractions of the dress code, for instance. Like, that's actually something that I see Dr. Best wanting to work on in the middle school. So I think there's so much work to do in this area. The other thing that I think we did really well is we've funded some positions for behavioral specialists. And that and restorative justice practices can really go a long way to improving those outcomes that need to be improved. Thank you.
Thank you all. We are now going to transition into a question about representativeness in the faculty. And the order for this question will be Jen McAndrews, Dorie Withey, Jen Razi-Thomas, and John Connelly. And again, it will be in the chat for you. Data from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education shows that for the Melrose 2019-2020 school year, people of color represented 23% of the student body, but only 4% of the staff. 6% of the student body is Black, but less than 1/2% of the staff are Black. To you, how much of a priority is recruiting more administrative and teaching staff of color in the Melrose Public Schools? What do you think the barriers are to increasing racial diversity in teaching staff in the Melrose Public Schools? And what are you doing to break down those barriers?
Thank you so much for that excellent question. Is this a priority for me? Yes. For the school committee currently, yes. And I think for the district, absolutely. And I also think of this as a topic where we need a local, regional, and state strategy, and we need to be advocating at the state level and the regional level as well. I say that because Jane quoted the numbers from 2 years ago in Melrose. Statewide, only 10% of public educators are people of color. 10%. So this is absolutely a local issue we need to work on. It's also a state challenge. That we need to be part of that, so that solution and those strategies as well. And we have made some progress locally. I'm not going to sort of get in the past couple of years, I'm not going to get into sort of examples. I think it's don't want to be tokenizing in any way, but I would also point out that in this year's budget, for the first time, we were able to include a diversity, equity, and inclusion director position. Adding positions to the budget is a big deal. And it's something that we can do as a school committee, should continue to do. We also have joined the teacher diversification professional learning community as a district. Ms. Razi-Thomas, I'm sure she'll talk about this, serves on that group for the school committee. And that is a statewide effort where Melrose is really one of the districts leading that effort and working with other districts to solve this challenge regionally. It is a big challenge. I'm not trying to say we have solved it. We haven't. We need to continue to examine why, who applies to our school system, why they do, what the barriers are, and how we can lower those barriers and make progress. Thank you.
Great. I think it's incredibly important for us to have a diverse admin and teaching and learning staff in Melrose. And I think some of the barriers that may exist could be pay. I don't know if we're actively recruiting educators of color in this current moment. If we're not, I think that's absolutely something we should be prioritizing. And then finally, will teachers of color, if they accept a position within the district, feel supported and affirmed, right? By admin and by colleagues within Melrose Public Schools as well. I think to help break down these barriers, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about our recruitment efforts. As I mentioned a moment ago, I think we have to be proactive, right? We should be reaching out to strong candidates of color and having conversations about Melrose. I would also love to work closely with the superintendent and to think flexibly and expansively about how can we support and appreciate all educators that are new to the district so that we can live up to that tagline that we all hold dear, right? Like one community, open to all.
Thank you. I think it's my turn, if I'm correct. So I think this is a really exciting area of work that I feel really honored to try to work on with the district. Examples of the things that you can do when you're on the committee that are really exciting is like email the assistant superintendent and superintendent this great TED talk by Melody Hobson called Colorblind or Color Brave. So there's like little things that you can do all the time to just try to keep it in the forefront of everyone's mind. Having the superintendent and the assistant superintendent come to the DEI task force this week, like those things, it's just like if all of us keep working on this together, and I mean everyone on this call and this meeting, then it's highlighting it, it's keeping it at the center, it's keeping it at the top of the agenda, it's doing anti-bias training before you hire people. So you very openly welcome everyone in as candidates. You don't just say, oh, did they go to Harvard? Or you know, you have to just literally open it up. And then you have to see that every person brings something that's really valuable. And you have to really try to get rid of all your past biases. And so the district is really working on that with the recent assistant superintendent process. They have this whole anti-bias training that we went through before we started working on interviewing people. So I can tell you that the district is trying, and I hope that in the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to see very different numbers that mirror, the staff is going to at least mirror the number of percentage of students of color. But we have to create pipelines. We have to create a really welcoming environment. We have to provide support and affinity groups for people of color so they feel like this is their home. This is where they work and they're proud of it. So we got a lot of work to do. It's great work and I want to keep doing it. Thank you.
John, I've just sent you a message to unmute yourself. Thank you.
I don't know how he did that, but okay. This is a problem. I don't know what the solution is, but it'd be great when the kids going through school now return as teachers and give back. And it's great for the pupils to look up and see a familiar face, and it's just better for everybody. But I tell you, years ago when I was a kid, but everybody came from Europe, the Italians, the Irish, the Jewish, and that was about it. But the world is smaller now. So the communities coming in from Asia, Africa, South America. Eventually, this is all going to change the dynamics of all the different races that incorporate into this great country. And this will happen. But until that time, we just got to use good judgment and encourage the young people to get through school and give back. Thank you.
Thank you all. In this next section, we're going to ask you a question about the curriculum, and the order for the questions will be Dorie, Jennifer Razi-Thomas, John Connelly, and Jen McAndrew. There's a bill before the State Senate, Bill 365, and there's a corresponding House bill, of course. The Senate bill is sponsored by our state senator, Jason Lewis, and it states, whereas racial education disparities and white-centric history have fostered lies, systemic inequity, and outright violence, it is in the best interest of the Commonwealth that education in dismantling racism be taught to all students, that teachers and school counselors be trained in pedagogy and practices that uplift students of all ethnicities and backgrounds, that truth and reconciliation regarding slavery, genocide, land theft, and systemic racism is centered, that students of color and students from immigrant and Indigenous communities may find their rightful place reflected in the history they learn, and that all Massachusetts students are given the chance to develop into informed, engaged members of society. What should the district do to uproot white supremacy and uplift students of color in the Melrose Public Schools curriculum?
Thank you, Jane. I think first and foremost, we should critically assess the curricular topics and materials that we are putting in front of students every single day to ensure that they're not only telling a white dominant narrative. I think too often we know that that is to be the case. And we need to ensure that the stories and the narratives that we are telling also include Black, Latinx, Native American, and Indigenous peoples. Those stories have to be stories we tell. And we have to do that because we want to ensure that we consistently have a stronger understanding of our historical figures, of the struggles we've had, and of the strengths that make up our country. And then second, I think we have to recognize the unique talents, the interests, the strengths, the perspectives of students of color, what they bring into our school buildings and our community. And as we affirm those, I think we'll continue to uplift students of color within the district.
Thank you. This is an incredible quote that was picked out of this bill. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. So I really want to make sure that all students see themselves represented in the curriculum, in books and history and holidays. We should teach the entire truths about our history in high school to the best of our ability, and in middle school to a lesser extent, and in elementary school to a lesser extent. But we should never be afraid to tell the truth about what's happened in our country, and we need to try to make things right that were wronged in the past by doing that, because our country is only going to get better from that. You know, we should live up to the ideals that are set down in our Constitution, and that's a wonderful patriotic thing to do. So I have great faith in our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. If you look at what she has curated for our district, if you look through her newsletters, she is a remarkable talent, and she's an incredible educator, and she's bringing up the opportunities of teaching and learning up and up and up. And she's very laser focused on how to do that for all students, but particularly students that have been marginalized, and particularly for students of color. we have to keep encouraging our teachers to be brave, and because I think they're still not sure that they can do that. So we have to keep really encouraging that. The truth shall set us free. So we got to keep telling the truth, and not be afraid of it. There's nothing to be afraid of it. And I work in a majority district of people of color, and so I know it can be done. So thank you.
Well, this is another, it's kind of a serious matter. It's reflected in the minorities trying to get their place. Now, just a few years ago, Barack Obama was elected, and that resonated all over the globe. And so unfortunately for some people, the history of the country has mostly white people, which is, I mean, either there, that's the way it is, but there's also a great Black history that can be incorporated in there. And some of these people come from other countries that have never really settled in or taken leadership roles. So until that time, which may be very shortly, and the dynamics, as I said, are changing constantly, we just kind of do the best they can. I don't think it's helpful now when you start tipping statues over and doing those things. It just, and the other thing is white supremacy. I don't understand that. It's just probably, I don't know. It's just, I noticed the Boston Globe always, when they talk about the Black Americans, capital B. If they talk about Asian Americans, capital A. And if they talk about the Spanish, they, capital S. But white, they always put a lowercase. It's kind of a zinger there. And that isn't helpful either. So with one country, we're all pulling together, and let's include everybody. That's about it, I guess.
Thank you for this important question, Jane. First of all, let me just say, this is not part of my official answer, but there is a place for everyone in the Melrose Public Schools, and I firmly believe that. And let me also say that in my view, the history of this country is not mostly white people, and I just want to clearly enunciate that. In terms of curriculum, which is what the question is about, we need to examine every aspect of our curriculum with an anti-racist lens, and we need to do that consistently over time. I think an example I would give of moving in the right direction in this regard, a positive example, is the current social studies program review. And I don't have time to get into all the details, but I'm happy to post it or send links around. We had a mid-cycle review of that at one of our most recent school committee meetings. I would like to also consider the district to do a special education program review, because I think that that would be incredibly important. And finally, I want to just say that we really need to be examining all of our texts and materials at every level, even at the elementary level, with this in mind. And that includes music and art and the theater productions and pieces that we teach and produce. And I also think that we have to remember just that this all requires investment. These materials, these curriculum reviews, they don't just appear out of thin air. They're not done sort of on people's, extra time. We need to invest in them and invest in the outcomes that they demand of us as a school district in order to make change. So I do want to bring it back to the point of budget as well. But thank you very much. I think that when we do this, not only will our curriculum be better, but our students will be better prepared. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate those answers. So Georgia, did you want to take it from here?
Sure, yeah, thank you. I've received a few really wonderful questions from folks in the audience. Thank you to those who sent them to me. And thank you again to everybody who sent questions in before the event. We really did take a long time looking at them and trying to synthesize concerns that came up. So we hope that the questions so far have really gotten at things that you are thinking about. Okay, the last question that we're going to go for tonight, and Maya, if you could put the order in the chat, I think we've got so good, our minds so in sync. The last question for tonight that we're going to ask is, what is one example of something related to diversity, equity, or inclusion, or anti-racism in the Melrose public school system or in the community that you have championed or advocated for? One like concrete example of something related to anti-racism work or diversity, equity, and inclusion that you have championed or advocated for. So we'll start with Jennifer Razi-Thomas, go to John Connelly, then Jen McAndrew, and then Dorie Withey. And this is 1 minute. Sorry, just gonna say this is 1 minute.
Okay, so quickly, I've encouraged the superintendent and the assistant superintendent to keep very focused on working on hiring a much more diverse workforce, and I will continue to do that. I also really like to elevate student voice whenever possible, and I want to have, we've always had student representatives to the school committee. I would like to have a student representative who's a student of color. And I perhaps also, a student from the MECO program, but it's, and they could come in virtually, so we just have to get voices in the room that are different from the usual voices that we have. And I promise that I will continue to advocate for that. Thank you.
The children, they're probably the least biased and prejudiced of all of us. They just happen to be with somebody playing and learning something. So a lot of these things that people are, I don't know what this critical race theory and all that they're trying to bring into the schools, it shouldn't go to the lower children. They have to have the ABCs, and they really get along, so why that time could be spent with math, which is down 16%, they said last year. And also parents and teachers should always work things together. If the kids are going out, teachers gotta let the parents know, even if they're uninterested. And one thing I wanted to get in is, oh, excuse me, no time. Thank you. I saw you, George. I saw you.
Thank you. Okay, we've talked about a couple of the things already, but I would say advocating within the budget process. I've already mentioned that. I'll give a really specific example. Last summer, the high school, several teachers at the high school did a book study for any student who wanted to do that. Any student in the high school on Ijoma Olu's book, So You Want to Talk About Race. And they ran it throughout the summer, these two teachers. And I got in touch with them and encouraged a corresponding book study for any member of the school committee or city council who wanted to come together with me and with the superintendent and do that book study. And we did have members of the school committee and some members of the city council participate, the mayor as well. And I also reached out to the chief of police and several others in the police department to see if they wanted to participate as well, and shared with them my thoughts on that text. So that's just a really specific example.
Great, thank you for the question. I started our conversation off saying that I'm currently a human rights commissioner here in Melrose, and as being a part of the Human Rights Commission, there are a few things that I've championed or helped to lead or helped to support. I'll name just a few. One, I oversaw Pride for the past year, where we brought community members together to celebrate alongside one another at the BB Estates. Two, I've worked over the past number of years on our MLK events, particularly bringing in a speaker series for the first time over the past 2 years, where we were able to feature a fantastic speaker during MLK. And we are also looking forward to bringing in another speaker to specifically talk about racial trauma and healing and how our community can support. And so those are just a few things within being a human rights commissioner that I feel like I've had the opportunity to do as it relates to anti-racism, becoming anti-racist and helping to support our community in that endeavor.
Great. Thank you. Is that everybody? Yeah, that was great. Everyone good. So we're getting towards the end of our time together, and we are actually a few minutes early. So I might ask if everyone on the school committee candidate board with us here is okay with it, that we would go back to a question that we dropped for time earlier, which I'll just read off. Well, I'm going to remember it off the top of my head. It was,
John Winthrop.
yes, thank you. It was about John Winthrop. If everyone could just bear
He
with
was
me.
a slave owner.
Okay, got it. All of the schools in Melrose that are named for people honor white men. One of those men, John Winthrop, was a well-documented slave owner. Do you believe that any of these names of schools should be changed? So I'm going to give you each 1 minute. I'm just going to, Maya put the order in the chat already. So we'll start with John Connelly, then Jen, then Dorie, then Jennifer Razi-Thomas.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, John Winthrop, he came from a big English family, and they were well-to-do. They owned a lot of land, and they had land in the U.S. around Groton, Massachusetts. So they were landowners. I'm sure they had slaves, and that was a way of life in the 1600s. And he was very religious, a Presbyterian, and he was a pilgrim. And there was Puritans and Pilgrim, very religious. They wanted to get away from King Charles. He was a mean guy. I'm getting down to it, but he even Congress. Excuse me. I'll go for. Anyhow, he was a good guy, and he was a pilgrim. That meant he went away from the problem. Puritans stayed there and tried to make the religion better. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I think we should be having this conversation as a school community, including teaching our students more about the people for whom their schools are named and involving them in these conversations, including young students. And I think we also at the same time need to embrace the fact that this is a complex topic, and we need to approach these kind of conversations with empathy for people who are coming to them from different places and different starting points. And I say all that not as an effort and excuse making for anyone, but because I think ultimately the outcomes will be better, and it will result in more community building, not less. It does remind me of the conversation around the school mascot as well, and I do think we need to be having this conversation and that one as a school community. Thank you.
Thank you. There's such a greater awareness about a person's role in history now. And when I was thinking about this question and doing some research, I learned that the last school was named in the 1960s. And at one point, we even had a school that was named after a female abolitionist, Mary Livermore. I do think it is worth re-examining the names and the context in which they were given. And I'm very thankful that this question was asked and I was allowed to share.
Tremendous opportunity. One of the things that's happened during the pandemic is we have all gained even more awareness around disparities, whether it's racial disparities, economic disparities, health disparities. And so I think it's a great opportunity to look at what community do we want to be and what do we want to name things. So I think I'm totally on board with students having a voice about how you name a school. It's a long process. There's a lot of feeling around it. We have to honor the great people who came before us and understand that there is context to their decisions, even if they were slave owners. We have to understand them, that moment in time. So that's all part of the learning that our community needs to do, and the work we need to do going forward is what do we want things to be named for and why. Thank you very much for this time together. I really appreciate it.
Fabulous. These are all, it was really great hearing from all of you today. Thank you so much for sharing and being here with us. We have about just 5 minutes left, so I'm going to offer each of you about 30 seconds for closing statements if you have anything you want to say. If you don't, that's also totally fine. I don't think we came up with an order for this, so I will just go with the order that I see on my screen, starting with Dorie.
Thanks, Maya. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say again, thank you for holding the space this evening to have this conversation. I'm on my own journey, as many people are, to become anti-racist, and I just appreciate the time to reflect and to be alongside the community.
Awesome. Next is John.
Yes, thanks a lot. This is very interesting, very educational, and it's wonderful, the exchange of ideas. I just want to put a plug in for they asked me what my platform is. One of the things is in DC, the Department of Education, huge, complex thing. And they took over about 1980, and there should be more the state control, so you get the local flavor of each education. So that's all. Thanks again. Wonderful.
Great. Jen McAndrews.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this forum. Thank you to all my fellow candidates, and thank you to the organizers. I think in closing, I would just add that in every decision that we make, we need to be asking ourselves 2 questions on this topic. As a district, are we moving towards being a more anti-racist school community? And secondly, are we preparing our students to live and thrive in a diverse democracy? I hope to continue to do.
Sorry, Jen.
Wow, that was hard.
We're harsh. All right, Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you very much for the time and the conversation, and it's great to meet you, John Connelly. I just want to plug 2 books that have helped me on my journey, and I promise to keep reading and telling you what books I'm reading. So The Warmth of Other Suns, which is by Isabel Wilkerson, amazing book. And then The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Like, changed my life, rocked my world. Keep reading, keep thinking, keep evolving, keep working on being the best we can be as a community.
Good for you.
I promise I'll try.
Thank you all very much. All right, some closing thoughts. A link to this recording will be emailed to you tomorrow after it is uploaded to YouTube. We'll also be posting it on the FBLN website and the Facebook page. If you are looking for it, feel free to get in contact, and we're also happy to just forward it to you. A reminder that the election is on November 2nd, and the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I think Georgia is right now copying a link to some more information for that into the chat. I want to offer a final huge thank you to all of our candidates for joining us and all of the attendees, as well as all of those who submitted questions ahead of time. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for contributing to the event. And it definitely would not have been possible without all of your help and support. So with that, we are about 4 minutes over the hour. And if you know any of these groups, you know that we pride ourselves in ending right on time. So I will just say thank you and close this out for the evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Thank you.